Hey, feeling good, like I should. When in dark, walk around the neighborhood.
What is up, guys? It's Certified Genius, and today we're going to be going over linear equations and linear functions. This is a new unit I wanted to start because I am doing this level of math in 8th grade. So, like, I'm learning high school stuff, but in 8th grade, and I wanted to teach it to you guys just in case you were struggling with the same thing I was. Other than that, I know I haven't posted in a long time, but I've been busy with, like, school. But anyways, let's get into the video, but don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on the post notifications. So a linear equation is an equation where the answer to that equation is a line. So literally, when you're graphing the lines in the equation, you're going to have an x-coordinate and a y-coordinate on the coordinate plane. And basically, this line could either be going up to your right, which means that it would be a positive, or it could be going down to your right, which means that it would be a negative slope, because, you know, all lines have slope. So when I talk about a t-table, it's a table of values that you use, of which you plug in to your equation and solve the equation to find out where the point on your graph is. Typically, these are integers and not really decimals, because decimals will be very complicated to plot on a graph. So I'm going to give you an example of y, which, you know, like, is in the term y equals mx plus b, which is a way to find slope. Y equals negative 2x, which negative 2 is our slope, plus 1. But we have to find, like, the points according to the t-table, which this is very difficult compared to another method called slope-intercept form, and that is way easier because that provides you a y-intercept and it provides you the slope, so you know how to graph it. But if you are using a t-table, which is the set of values you plug into your equation for x, because, like I said, y equals negative 2x plus 1. We're trying to find, we already know our x-coordinate, so we're trying to find our y-coordinate when plugging in to this equation, because it says y equals, and we don't know what y is until we plot the points. So with the table of values, you can set up your values in a plethora of ways, but, like, the way that I like to set up mine is negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and then 2. Seen here. Because if you have these numbers, it's easier to find integers and, like, those actual whole numbers instead of finding those decimals. And if a question, like if you're doing a test or anything, specifically asks for an integer, you have to find the right numbers in order to plot that line and to plot it in the exact way of which it can form the correct line. Because if you do, like, put a decimal on there or something like that, the line isn't really, like, it's still straight, but it's not really going to be, like, easy for the math. So yeah. Anyways, so if I have my equation y equals negative 2x plus 1, and I plug in my first value, which is negative 2, for x, that means that my equation is going to be y equals negative 2 times negative 2 plus 1. And we all know that, we not all know how to, like, evaluate an equation. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, because a negative times a negative is a positive. That means we have positive 4 plus 1, which is 5. So our y value is going to be 5. And if we had a graph, of which there is a graph, I'm going to show you, like, later when we're finished with our table, I'm going to show you that you can plot these points, and then it'll, if you're correct, it'll show up as a line. And then our next value is negative 1. That means we're going to plug in negative 1 for x. That means your equation now turns into y equals negative 2 times negative 1 plus 1. So as I said before, negative times a negative is a positive, which means that you're going to have positive 2, because 2 times 1 equals 2. And then 2 plus 1 is 3. So that means your next y value is going to be at 3. Next, our next value is 0. And you know 0 is just really nothing. So if we put y equals -2 times 0 plus 1, well, we know anything times 0 is 0. So then that means that it's just plus 1, and 1 is the only thing left, so our y value is 1. Next is positive 1. Now, when you have a t-table, it's very important that you have a negative value and a positive value, because you know there's 4 quadrants in a graph and everything. So if you have like all positives, your line's going to be very hard to create. Now we have positive 1, which means our equation is going to turn into y equals -2 times 1 plus 1. Now, if we do a negative number times a positive number, your outcome is going to be negative. That means it's going to be -1 times 1, which is -2. I mean, -2 times 1, which is -2. And then is plus 1. Now, negative plus a positive, think of that as subtraction, because a positive is going to cancel out a negative. So that means that we're only going to be left with -1. So our y value for a positive 1 is our -1. And our last x value is 2. That means our equation is going to turn into y equals -2 times 2 plus 1. Now, negative times a positive is a negative, which means that we're going to have -4. Plus 1 is going to be -3. So now it's time to graph. And this is when you actually truly find out if your answer is correct or not. Because when you're dealing with linear equations or linear functions and you're graphing, your answer in your equation is always going to turn out to be a line on a graph. Now, if you're dealing with slope and you wanted to solve for slope algebraically, you use a simple formula, but I'm going to wait for the next video to explain that. So anyway, according to the points on your t-table, of which we solved for the x value and the y value, it's time for us to graph our points. So when we graph the first point, -2, which is our x value, and then 5, which is our y value, we're going to go to -2 on the x, like on the x line, and then we're going to go up 5 on the y line, which is vertical, which these are called axes, but like I just say lines, but I'm going to start saying axes. So you go to -2 on the x-axis and you go up 5 on the y-axis, and there is your first point. Now, when you're doing linear equations, it only takes 2 points on a graph to find a line. But if a question specifically asks you to graph all of your coordinate pairs, then you would do that and then you would connect them with a line. So our next point is -1 as our x value and then 3 as our y value. So I'm going to go to -1 on the x-axis, and I'm going to go up to 3 on the y-axis. And then you have -1 and then 3. And you keep doing this continually with every number, with every coordinate pair on your t-table until you have all your points plotted. You connect them with the line with arrows on the top because a line is never ending. And then you should be set with each one. Now, I'm going to give you another example. And I want you guys to try it, at least, like, on a piece of paper. And I know probably some people are like, I ain't going to do this on no piece of paper. You think I'm dumb. You think I'm going to listen to you. But you don't got to listen to me. But this is for your benefit. Anyways, so our next problem is going to involve a fraction in our problem. Now, I don't want you guys to get scared of a fraction, because a fraction is still just a number. Our equation is y equals negative 1/2 x plus 2. Now, when you have fractions as like connected to your x in the equation, your t-table values are going to have to be multiples of the denominator. And the reason for that is because if you made them anything else, they would come up as decimals or very ugly decimals. And when I say ugly, I mean like the never-ending decimals, which we really don't want to make our math complicated. So if our fraction is negative 1/2, we have to find the multiples of 2 because 2 is our denominator. So for the t-table values, what numbers could you put? And I want you to answer that in your head first before I give you like the answers. It's just multiples, and multiples basically means the numbers that like multiply starting from that number. So if I had like 3, a multiple of 3 is 6. Another multiple of 3 is 9. 12. It basically goes on. So what's a multiple of 2? Oh, there's negative 4. So you can put that in our table of values. There's negative 2, which you could also put. And then there's also 0. Since 0 is like nothing, 0 to me is like an essential factor in a t-table regardless of if it involves a fraction or not. So I just add 0 to everyone. Then there's positive 2 and positive 4. And positive and negative always change like the coordinate pair. So you'll understand when you finally get the hang of it. So if we were to put negative 4, our first x value, in for x, that would mean that our equation would be y equals negative 1/2 times negative 4 over 1. And the reason I say negative 4 over 1 is because when you're multiplying fractions times whole numbers, some people get confused because they don't turn the whole number into a fraction. And the way that you turn a whole number into a fraction is by putting a 1 under it. Then that still means that it's a whole number, but we just turned it into fraction form. That makes it easier for us to multiply. So that's negative 1/2 times negative 4 over 1, which means that if you're going to multiply that times negative 4 over 1, well, it's negative times negative. And if you know the basics of solving equations for variables with negative or positive integers, negative times a negative is a positive. So that means that our answer is going to be positive. And it's clear that our answer is also going to be an improper fraction because it's negative 4 times 1 as the numerator over 2 times 1 as the denominator. So what's negative 4 times negative 1? That's 4. Over negative 2 times negative 1, which is just 2. So our answer is 4 over 2. And that is an improper fraction. Now, if you ever have an improper fraction that doesn't go completely into your denominator, then you keep it as an improper fraction. But if your improper fraction is as simple as 4 over 2, well, how many times does 2 go into 4? Twice. So that means that we can simplify 4 over 2 to 2. And then it turns into y equals 2 plus 2. Because our original equation was y equals negative 1/2 x plus 2. And then that's 4. So that means that negative 4 for the x value, its y value would be 4. It sounds complicated, but like when you do this process in your head, it like is stuck there. So next, our next x value is negative 2. That means our equation is y equals negative 1/2 times negative 2 over 1. Remember, because a whole number, we have to turn it into a fraction to multiply, and a whole number turned into a fraction is just over 1. So now it's negative 2 negative 2 times negative 1, that's just 2 over 2. And we know if it's a negative fraction times a negative fraction, it's going to be a positive fraction. This is also true for integers. That means 2 over 2 just equals 1, because a 2 out of 2 can just simplify to a 1. That means that our our y coordinate is going to be 1. So now it's 0's turn. And for people who might be confused, 0 cannot be negative, nor is 0 positive. 0 is just 0. Nothing is there for 0, which means it's literally just nothing. That means that it's negative 1/2 times 0 plus 2, which means that we know that negative 1/2 times 0 is just going to equal 0. This is also true for integers. Anything times 0 is 0. So now we're just left with plus 2. So our y coordinate is 2. Next x value is our regular positive 2. That means our equation turns into y equals negative 1/2 times 2 over 1. Now mind you that this 2 is positive now. And a positive times a negative is negative. So now it's negative 1/2 times 2 plus 2. And then you're going to get a negative 2 over 2, which equals 1, negative 1. So now we have negative 1 plus 2. Now there's more positive than there is negative. Positive 2 is way more than negative 1. So think of a negative plus a positive as a subtraction problem, right? That negative is going to cancel out one of the positives because the negative number is 1. So that means that you're just going to be left with positive 1. So that means that our y coordinate would be positive 1. And now our next and final value is 4. Our equation then turns into y equals negative 1/2 times 4 over 1 plus 2. Now this 4 is positive, which means our answer is going to be negative. 4 times negative 1 equals negative 4 over 2, which means that this answer is just going to be negative 2 plus 2. And now, since it's 2 plus a negative 2, that's enough negatives to cancel out the negatives in the regular 2, which means your answer is going to be 0. Negative 2 plus 2 equals 0. It's basically saying 2 minus 2 equals 0. And that's our final coordinate. So now that we have all our coordinate pairs, we can graph. And this is where graphing skills really need to come in, because our answer is going to be a line. If your line ain't correct, then your answers are all wrong. You can make your graph as long as you want, or the necessary length for the amount of coordinate pairs you have. Mine only needs to go to maybe 4. Yeah, because that's the highest number that my graph goes to. You can make yours 6 depending on the problem. The graph can be up to 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now that you have your graph, and pause the video if you need more time to make your graph, if you're actually doing the problem. We're going to start plotting our points, and this is when we're going to find out our answer. So first we have, for our x value, negative 4. So we're going to go negative 4 on our x-axis, and then we're going to go up positive 4 on our y-axis. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so there's our first point. Then we do our second point, our third point, our fourth point, and our fifth point. Just depending on how many numbers you have in your t-table, points could go on. Like sometimes you'll give you 10 Test will give you a t-table of like 7 values, and it's like that's complicated. So hopefully you only get like t-tables with like 5 or 4 values, because those are the easiest. Our next point is -2 as our x value. So you go to -2, and then you go up 4. Is that what we got? 1. You go up 1. You go up 1. Don't get confused by your handwriting or your numbers. We go up 1. Right? And remember, you only need 2 points to plot a line. I don't know how to stress that enough. It only takes 2 points. You don't need like 3 or 4 or 5 unless a test specifically asks you to do that. All you truly need to plot a line on the graph are 2 points. So really, if I wanted to, I really could only plot these 2. But in the real life situations, like a test or something like that, they're probably gonna ask you to plot all of the points. And then our next set of values is 0 as our x, which means we're just gonna stay in the middle of our graph. And the middle of a graph is called the origin. And because it's 0, and it starts to branch off into 4 quadrants for the graph. So we have 0, and then we go up to +2 on our y-axis. Now this is where a lot of mistakes occur, like mine. Because when you graph something like this, sometimes when you do your math, you have to make sure that you are truly correct. And if you make a mistake, then that means you have that whole coordinate pair to do. So here is what the graph looks like. Our set of values we saw for the equations. So now we have 0 and then +2. So you have 0, start the origin, go up 2. Then we have a point. And now our next set of values is +2 as our x, and then +1 as our y. So we go to +2 on our x-axis, and then we go up 1 on our y-axis. And then finally, it's our final set of values. X is 4, +4. So we go to +4. And then our y is 0. If your y coordinate is 0, that means you don't go up at all. If your x value is 0, that means you don't go side to side at all. You stay right in the origin. So when anything says 0 for the x or the y, you just don't do anything that's necessary for those points. If y coordinate says 0, then you don't go up. If an x coordinate says 0, you don't go side to side. So then your line, if you actually drew it, decently, it should look like this. Now this is like a whole set of work. Now sometimes in equations, there's just horizontal lines or there's just vertical lines. And how you can tell if they're vertical or horizontal is if the equation says y equals or x equals, and then it'll only have one number. And you only plot that one point, and then you're finished. You already plotted your point, because there's no other points you could go off of. But anyways, that is the end of the video. Sounds a little bit complicated, I know. We're gonna go over it more in the future. But other than that, I thought this was an okay video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Turn on the post notifications when I post. And I will see you guys next time. Peace.